Hi and welcome to the Stefan Livera podcast, a show about Bitcoin and Austrian economics. Today, my guest is Samourai Wallet. The Stefan Livera podcast is brought to you by Kraken, one of the world's leading Bitcoin exchanges. They offer a high-quality platform with high trading volume and low fees. They've also got 24/7 support, and they've got a chat box so you can very quickly and easily get your questions answered. Kraken also have Kraken Security Labs, assessing the security and improving the security not just of Kraken, but also of other peers within the Bitcoin ecosystem. Kraken also offer Kraken Pro mobile app. Kraken Pro delivers all the security and features you love about the Kraken exchange in a beautiful mobile-first design for advanced Bitcoin trading on the go. They've also got some updates recently where you can add markets and list favorites. You can refine your timeframes for charting, and you can also receive vibrating feedback on all major actions. Go and sign up at kraken.com. This episode is also brought to you by Unchained Capital. They're a Bitcoin financial services company empowering customers with financial freedom and control. All their products and services are built on the foundation of multi-sig. So they offer these 2 of 3 multi-signature vaults. You can use Trezor or Ledger, and Coldcard is coming soon. They've got an easy-to-use web interface, and you can secure your Bitcoins and then separate your keys geographically to give yourself a little bit more security. And in that model, Unchained will act as the backup or as the cosigner. And then if you need to access USD liquidity, you can use Unchained's collateralized loans. You can put up Bitcoins and get back USD. That Bitcoin is stored on-chain in dedicated multi-sig addresses, and it's never rehypothecated. And you still hold 1 of 3 keys in that scenario. I'm really impressed with Unchained. Check out some of my recent interviews with Will Cole, Parker Lewis, Drew Barnsell. They've got awesome services and content. Go and check them out at unchained-capital.com. Next is CipherSafe. CipherSafe.io. They're producing the Cipher Wheel product. So if you've invested in a Bitcoin hardware wallet and you've got those 12 or 24 words, the BIP39 seed, have you backed that up in a way that's fireproof, waterproof, rust-proof, pet-proof, and tamper-evident? So with the Cipher Wheel, it comes in a wheel shape and you slide in the little letter tiles, and you have 4 tiles per word, which is enough to recover for a BIP39 seed. And also the Cipher Wheel masks the words of your seed. So with that padlock tamper-evident seal, you know if it's been opened or not. So make sure you or your loved ones have access to your Bitcoins if an accident occurs. Orders are going out now. Go and order yours at cyphersafe.io. So for this interview, it was done while I was in London for Advancing Bitcoin conference. So we talk about a lot of things. We talk about creeping KYC, the existence or non-existence of Taint and what people can do about that, Stonewall and coin selection algorithms, Stowaway and PayJoin, wallet fingerprinting, mobile mixing, Dojo, Ronin Dojo, as well as Samourai Wallet's thoughts on Lightning and Liquid. One other note, apologies, I did have some audio problems with the Samourai Wallet side of the audio for this interview. Unfortunately, I did do a pre-audio check, but the cable must have been faulty. So I've done what I can to clean it up. I think it's still very listenable. There's probably just about 10 or 15 minutes where there's some slight distortion, but hopefully that doesn't distract you too much. Here's the interview. Samourai Wallet, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back. Thank you for having me.
So obviously I'm a big fan of the wallet. This is now your 3rd appearance on the show. Yep. We've got to, get a bit of an update from you on what's going on with Samourai Wallet and, Bitcoin for the streets. So look, let's start with Bitcoin for the streets, right? So this is the theme that has come up in some of our earlier discussions and also other, let's call them related podcast episodes, people like Pura Vida or Ergo, who was on the show as well. We're in this environment where we're seeing more and more creeping KYC, as you say. How do you see that playing out?
Creeping KYC in general?
Yeah.
Well, we know how it plays out. We've seen the introduction of KYC in the 70s. We've seen the massive enlargement of the KYC program after 9/11 encoded in the Patriot Act. And we're at the point now where we're starting to see everyday people can be financially excluded as a result of this system. So if if these people make the wrong social move, they might find themselves on the wrong end of the ability to get a bank account or anything like this. So we know what KYC ends up as, and Bitcoin for the streets is kind of the antidote to that. And we started that slogan towards the end of 2019, Bitcoin is for the streets, in response to the growing KYC-based infrastructure, not only on Bitcoin main chain, but on Lightning and other various aspects. And we just kind of felt like it was time for Bitcoin users to get back to their roots, to take a self-reflective stance and ask themselves, really, is this thing going the right way? Yes, it's successful. Bitcoin is successful, objectively, from when I started in 2013. So when I started in 2013 to now, Bitcoin is more successful. There's more users, there's a higher market price, there's more services, there's more, all of that is true. But culturally, is it going in the right direction? Or have we just built a replacement for the existing system?
Gotcha. And I think some of this discussion also, to me, reminds me of some of this kind of debate about, okay, hodling and spending and so on. And I think it's fair to say that the economics of it are driven by the hodling factor. But I see you as making more of a social commentary argument here around the use of Bitcoin in day-to-day spending as opposed to hodling. Now, I guess, in fairness, I'm more on the kind of hodl side, but my view is more like, if you are spending, when you do so, you should use a Coinjoin kind of spend.
Sure.
But yeah, what's your view?
Well, I came into Bitcoin. What interested me about it was the economics. As what I would consider an Austrian, that is kind of, well, it's weird with Austrians. You either really hate Bitcoin or you're really into it. There's no, it's a very strange thing. But so that interested me just in general. But what really got me going was that I needed to move money from the US to the UK. And it was very expensive to do that. There wasn't TransferWise, or if it was very, early. So it was like a $50 thing to move funds from the US to the UK. And I needed something that I could do that with. And Bitcoin checked all those boxes. So I came into it because I needed it from a utility standpoint. But what interested me was the economics of it all. Since that time, or shortly after that time, I have been living on Bitcoin fully. I don't make a fiat salary, I make a Bitcoin salary. And that's changed the way that I think about Bitcoin from less of a theoretical economist point of view to more of a utility point of view, because I use this on the streets every single day. If I'm unable to convert BTC into some sort of currency that most people will accept, whether that be fiat in the form of banknotes or fiat in the form of a gift card or something like that, then I have a real serious issue. And that's really where Samourai Wallet kind of started and came from, was that my co-founder and I, both living on Bitcoin, both earning in Bitcoin, both requiring Bitcoin to work for us in order to pay our rent and to eat food and to do all this sort of stuff that you need to do to live, we didn't feel like there was a wallet out there that satisfied any of those conditions for those types of users. And even if that was such a small niche of users, we felt like, well, we should make the software for them, and that's where Samourai has kind of come from.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're eating your own dog food, to use the software term. That in some cases you get people who make software for who they think is their customer, but then they haven't really got a clear picture if they're not using it for themselves and day to day seeing the troubles and the problems and what needs to be fixed and improved on the product or on the service.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to eat your own dog food. It's absolutely essential, especially with Bitcoin. And we saw with 2015, 2016, we saw the rise of a lot of apps, a lot of services out there, or the decline of a lot of giants, who were titans of a very small industry, just completely crumble or vanish or whatever it is, or fade into technological irrelevance, precisely because on the product level they stopped using their product. They had no idea what it is they were trying to do, and they kept trying to design Bitcoin for grandma, or they kept trying to design Bitcoin for these non-existent users, when Bitcoin users were right there demanding the features to make it usable for them. So I say it a lot in our Telegram room, and there is a large amount of truth to it. But we built Samourai for us. You're along for the ride. So you may not like our decisions, like to, for example, remove fiat from the wallet. You may think that was a stupid choice. You may think that was a bad product move, and you're totally entitled to that opinion. But like I just said, we make this product for us, so we want to use this in the way that we want to use it. And if you're into that and you like the product, then you're going to really enjoy it. And then if not, then there's so many other wallets out there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and there's definitely a focus. I see even as I'm in the chat room, and I see some of the focus around the use of Bitcoin in Darknet markets. And it's like this idea that, well, if the Darknet markets aren't using whatever this product is, then maybe it's not practical or it's not ready yet. What's your thought on that?
Well, we have to ask who were the first group of people to implement Bitcoin in an economic and e-commerce sort of setting. It was the Darknet markets. They came first. They didn't have. They didn't look at it for the economics. They didn't look at it and go, "Oh yeah, this is limited supply. Okay, great, yeah." That's not what they were in there for. They were there for the censorship resistance. They were there for the finality, the instant finality, and the fact that they did not have to rely on a third party to perform whatever transactions they were performing. So they came in and they accepted it before anyone else, before any of the nerds did, before anyone else. They accept because they sell real use and utility, and it solved the problem for them. And it still, to this day, is solving a problem for them. So if the darknet markets aren't taking up your technology in the relation of cryptocurrency, your privacy coin, your whatever it is, your improvement to the network, whatever it is, then I think that deserves some reflection. You have to ask yourself, well, why? Why not? With Bitcoin, even so early, 2000, what was Silk Road was 2011 when that started, or 2012?
I wasn't around then, so roughly then, I guess. Yeah,
I think it went down in 2012 or early 2013.
I think it went down in 2013.
Yeah,
but
2013.
I think it might have started in 11 or 12.
Yeah, so I forgot what the point I was making, but 2011, right? So they took that risk, they implemented this, and it just worked. They didn't have to do a bunch of stuff; it just worked. So yeah, Bitcoin is. If you really try to understand it, it looks very complicated on the surface, but in fact, it's complicated, but there's beauty in its simplicity. You can kind of grok it from like 1,000-mile view, whereas I see a lot of these other things start popping up on side chains or layer 2 stuff or all, and it requires a lot more thought around it because they're so much more complex. And yeah, there's just a beautiful simplicity to Bitcoin, I think, is what I'm trying to get. Yeah, and I think that attracted those, the darknets because of that. It was easy to implement and it served the purpose.
Yeah, and as I understand today, darknet markets online, they primarily use Bitcoin, but there's also some use of Monero, but they're not using Zcash in any meaningful way. They're not using any of these other cryptocurrencies. It's basically Bitcoin because it's the economic winner and potentially Monero.
I've seen Monero and Bitcoin, yeah. I haven't seen... I heard that some darknet was accepting Dash or something, which is laughable. That coin has KYC built in at the protocol level, so...
It's a joke, yeah.
It's a joke. Yeah. But I've heard rumblings, this darknet's going to implement this, this coin. And I think those rumblings obviously are not true, but I think that they're useful for pumping whatever coin it is that person is trying to pump, because people do know the value that a darknet implementing a certain coin has. That's a big event for that coin or whatever.
It is interesting that I guess the point, as you're saying, is that darknet markets are not yet using Lightning, for example.
I don't know of any. No, I don't know of any. You would think that Lightning would be an ideal choice for a darknet, right? Because one of the you have to deal with confirmations and the risk of double spends and all sorts of stuff when you're transacting anywhere, but especially what you could classify as a moderately risky transaction, right? So you would think that a Lightning Network, which claims to be private, which I don't know about, I don't know enough about the Lightning Network, and also you do not have the issue of double spending. You do not have the issue of waiting around for confirmations. You would think that that would be a perfect application at a retail level. Why haven't they done that?
Yeah, and I guess my thought on that is more like maybe it's still early, maybe it's still being developed. But yeah,
totally early. I think it is too early. I think that's the right answer. I think it's incredibly complicated. It's not straightforward to implement, and I think anyone who is a merchant and has tried implementing Lightning to serve more than just a small group of people on Twitter, but to like actually serve a large number of consumers, they run into the same kind of issues, scaling issues, and all sorts of stuff that, you know, rebalancing their channels and not having enough inbound liquidity and not having enough outbound liquidity or whatever. You know, there's all these things that happen, and I'm not knocking the Lightning Network because it's an early tech, but it certainly isn't ready. And there's so many different what ifs that could happen. And that was my point about the simplicity of Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, the state is either spent or unspent. That's it. You know, the UTXO is either existing or it's not.
Yeah. So look, let's go more into, you know, Samourai Wallet and the, you know, privacy implications and some of the, you know, the different products and so on. And I think it might be good to start with a high level concept. And as I understand the view from you and the team of Samourai is that Taint does not exist, and it is observed only by each different participant who is, you know, either observing the blockchain or being, you know, using the blockchain themselves. And then I've also heard from TDev, I guess you can think of him like the CTO and co-founder of Samourai Wallet, and his view is speaking about these concepts like fade and scatter and dilution. Can you tell us a little bit about that and, you know, Taint in general, the Samourai Wallet position?
Sure. Well, Taint doesn't exist, as you say. I mean, it's just a human thing put on top of an agnostic, you know, layer. It doesn't exist in Bitcoin. It doesn't exist in fiat, but it does exist because it's there, right? People can go to jail based on the history of their funds. People can be denied, you know, like I said earlier, bank accounts because they can't prove where their wealth has come from. So, you know, the concept of Taint, it's kind of like, you know, where does the government derive its legitimacy from? Who cares? They're here, right? Like, and that's the same thing with Taint. Taint's here. So when you look at it that way, you have to play their game. And in playing their game is where we come up with concepts like scatter and fade. So scatter, let's see how we can explain scatter. Scatter measures when you have a set of UTXOs. Scatter measures how best to spend a UTXO so as to preserve the privacy that has been obtained prior to that transaction. So if you've done a transaction like a Stonewall or something like this, scatter will determine and simulate what this spend will do to your overall transaction graph and your overall cluster. Fade on the opposite measures how much distance has been applied since one transaction, and this is all like kind of technical stuff and stuff that happens in the background of the wallet when the wallet decides I'm going to use this UTXO and this UTXO to compose this transaction.
Yeah, gotcha. You know what? Let's just to keep it accessible. Obviously, I know what you're speaking about, and I think many of my listeners do. But just for those who are not following, just a super quick. UTXO means unspent transaction output. And so remember, when your wallet spends Bitcoins, what it's really doing is it's like signing certain inputs. And think of it, I guess the best analogy I've heard is like, you've got a piece of gold, I've got a hunk of gold, and then I kind of melt it down and recast that into little bits that I send to my participant or to the other person. And then I would receive some of that back as change. So quick example, if I've got 0.5 Bitcoins and I want to spend 0.1, just high level, think of it like I'm spending 0.1 to you, Samourai Wallet, and then 0.4 is coming back to me. That's my change, UTXO, or change output rather. And so in blockchain analysis and so on, one of the things people talk about is this idea of proximity to, let's say, for example, the Mt. Gox hack, right, which was a famous exchange in 2013, and some of the coins associated with that will get, let's call it, flagged by a chain analysis or chain spy company, and that, I guess, bringing it back to this concept of scatter and fade. Fade, in this case, is kind of measuring distance from that, let's call it, the Mt. Gox address, for example's sake. Would that be a good summary?
Yeah, exactly. And even more than just distance from a specific address, it's more about, so let's use the concept or the example of a darknet market. Let's say I have done an illicit transaction on the darknet market. This is very serious. I bought some sort of religious material in some theocracy. I could go to jail for a long time for this grave sin. So I want to measure, and I did that like 3 weeks ago. And I noted that down on my wallet. I made a note and said, this transaction refers to this illicit religious purchase. What Fade would do is, when selecting UTXOs, as you just explained what UTXO is, so the wallet selects UTXOs to make a transaction. When it's doing that, it will select UTXOs that maximize the distance, the fade between that illicit transaction and whatever transaction you're making now, and at the same time display that to the user and show them just how much fade and how much distance has been applied.
Gotcha. Right. And so for most users, you're typically, if you're just coming from a random Bitcoin wallet, you would just see your balance. But actually in the background, what your wallet is doing, think of your wallet like a keychain, and it holds the keys for lots of these little pieces of Bitcoin, as we mentioned, those little hunks of gold or UTXOs in our model. And that's essentially what, that's one thing I like about the Samourai Wallet, because it actually deals with that complexity for the user, so long as you use some of the tools and the algorithms that are in place. So an example here is the Stonewall algorithm, as you mentioned. So can you tell us a little bit about Stonewall and what you're thinking to do with that, and kind of building in that idea of, the scatter and fade idea?
Yeah. So Stonewall was one of our first decoy features. I'm going to call it a decoy feature. And the idea of Stonewall was, let's create a transaction that appears to be a Coinjoin, mathematically looks like a Coinjoin, and you can't prove it's not a Coinjoin. But we know, and the user who made the transaction knows, it's not actually a Coinjoin. And that was, I think, in 2015. That's one of our earliest features. It wasn't called Stonewall back then, though. And what that does is it introduces these transactions into the blockchain, where anyone just who stumbles across them, or an analyst who's looking for a Coinjoin style transactions, would come across these, and they may mark them as, oh, these are Coinjoins or something like this, but they're not. Right, so we look at anything that we can do to make their information, the transaction graph, incorrect. Their clusters contain more false positives. We look at that as a win. So that's the idea around Stonewall, and then we've extended that now. I think it was in 2018, where we came out with something called cahoots, which is a multi-person, two-person coin joining technology. And there's two types of cahoots. One is a Stonewall X2. So this is actually a Stonewall that pretends to be a coin join, but is actually a coin join, because it's two people actually joining their coins together. But they can't be differentiated from a standard Stonewall. So what we've done in doing that is, now any transaction that's a Stonewall, as of the date that we released Stonewall X2, could be a coin join, could be a fake coin join. Impossible to tell on the blockchain. So that, again, adds a lot of doubt to the confidence of the chain analysis data sets when they're dealing with Stonewall transactions.
Right. And so, again, just a little bit of background for the listener who might not have listened to other episodes. One of the key ways of framing or thinking about this from a chain spy or chain analysis type of person is they're looking at a certain cluster of addresses, right? So remember, we were talking about UTXOs. Well, one of the ways that chain spy companies try to break that is by essentially creating this, what we call a transaction graph, and then looking for all the linkages between that, and they might have exchange data, and then they might have an insight into, oh, okay, this is Stefan Livera, and he KYC'd with ABC Exchange, and we saw he withdrew to this address, and this is the trace of the transactions. And so Stonewall is a kind of way of helping break that clustering idea.
Yeah. So we've had some insiders at various chain analysis companies who like what we do, and they do feed us information every once in a while. And I don't know how reliable or accurate it is, but I like to think it's probably true. When this particular company encounters a Stonewall transaction, they just put it to the side. They don't bother adding it to their cluster because they realize that they cannot, with any mathematical certainty, determine the input to output mappings. And if they add it to their cluster, it would just increase the amount of incorrect data, and it would increase the amount of false positives that are triggered. And look, these guys aren't, they don't want false positives triggering, because then their customers get mad at them. Their customers, who are the exchanges, say, hey, all of these people who have no business getting shut down are getting shut down because your software is telling us that they should be.
I guess the other important point to add in here is that just bare Stonewall versus doing something like running through a Whirlpool Coinjoin and then doing a Stonewall is where probably more powerful tools, or that's a more powerful combination. So can you tell us a little bit about the flow there? I know we spoke about this in the last episode, but just for the listeners who aren't familiar, that idea of running through a Whirlpool Coinjoin and then doing your Stonewalls.
Yeah, sure. So Whirlpool is our Coinjoin implementation, and when you enter into Whirlpool, no matter with what amount you enter into, you're going to have on the other end of the Whirlpool, when it's done with its process, you're going to have a bunch of like-sized outputs, depending on which pool you entered. So if you entered into the 0.1 pool, then you'll have a bunch of outputs of 0.01 BTC. When you go to spend those, because it's very likely that you're going to need to spend more than an exact amount of 0.01 BTC, your wallet will probably need to choose multiple inputs when you're making a transaction, right? So if you're spending 0.05 BTC, then your wallet will need to select 5.01 UTXOs to make that transaction. Now, most wallets will just immediately select those 5, make the transaction, and if there's change required, send it right back to you. This is less than ideal because there is no mathematical uncertainty there. It's 100% certain that these 5 inputs, these 5 0.01 inputs, belong to the same entity, and they're going to this destination. And if there's a change output, then they know that this change output belongs to the original entity as well. In order to combat this, what we've done is put post-mix spending tools directly in the wallet. And one of those post-mix spending tools is Stonewall or Stonewall X2. And the reason you would want to level up your Whirlpool with a Stonewall on the way out is additional entropy or additional confusion as to, I know this was a Coinjoin on back one hop, but this spend, I can't figure it out. Who's the owner of these inputs? And especially if it's an actual Stonewall X2, which is a secondary Coinjoin with a friend, there's really no hope at that point of tracking the inputs to outputs, and that's on the spend. So you get the Whirlpool process, which is, you can think of doing that before spending, like you're preparing your wallet, right? This isn't something that you're spending to Whirlpool. That's not how it works. You're transferring your funds into your Whirlpool specific area of the wallet, which is segregated from the main area of your wallet. And you're preparing for the point in where you will need to spend, so that when you do go to spend, you're not sacrificing a huge amount of your privacy to do so.
I think another way to think about this, if you are a merchant or if you are receiving a lot of inputs, like because you're getting paid, you have to also remember that one of the ways that Chainalysis and other related companies, CipherTrace and Cypherblade and a few of these other ones, Elliptic, one thing that they can do is try and, if they know that's your address. They can send you one little piece of Bitcoin and then see where it goes afterwards, and then try to understand, oh, okay, this is where it's gone and connected through to this guy's cold storage or outwards afterwards. But then that one way to think about that now is if you first run that through Whirlpool, then you are kind of breaking the link there.
You're definitely breaking the link. Yeah. There's nowhere to go from there. So years ago, we implemented something called, what's it called? Dust alerts, right? So, and this is to combat the exact scenario that you just mentioned, where if you have a known address, an analysis company could send you a very small amount of Bitcoin there. So maybe it's an address you shared on Twitter, or it's an address, whatever, and follow the flow of those funds. Back then, most wallets just didn't show you anything to do with UTXOs at all. So you had no idea really that would follow you around throughout your transactions history. And that's in Samourai Wallet where the feature do not spend came from. Right now it's being used mostly as like a reverse coin control feature, but that really came from the ability to say, hey, Dust has entered your wallet. This might be a way to track you. Would you like to mark this as do not spend? And
that's where it came from.
That's where it came from.
And I think while we're on this topic of do not spend, we should probably also touch on toxic change. So again, for the background for the listeners, when you do a Samourai Wallet Whirlpool, what actually is happening first is you need to do a TX0. That TX0, so let's make an example. Let's say we're going in the 0.01 pool and I've got something like 0.055 or whatever, right? Like just a little bit over 0.05. Right, and then I do my TX0, and that cuts that down into 5 0.01 pieces, just a little bit more to account for mining fee and so on. And then part of the fee goes to Samourai Wallet as well. And then there'll be a little hunk of change, a little piece of change that comes back into my main wallet. That is very, from a analysis point of view, that's known as like toxic change. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how to manage that?
That was an excellent description of what toxic change is. And it's a very hard problem to deal with, right? The toxic change. And we've done our best, and I think we've done a good job of making sure that toxic change, which is a reality of Bitcoin, you can't, in the UTXO model, you can't get around it. We've made sure that toxic change, at the very least, is completely separated from the actual mixing that occurs after the TX0. It goes back to your main account in your Samourai Wallet, your main wallet view. But you're absolutely right. Even keeping it out of the main mix and putting it segregated, there's still a risk there. And the risk is that you will use that change in another transaction that, let's pretend you're now sending to some sort of KYC service. You would use that change as part of the transaction that you're making to this KYC service, thereby linking that this particular TX0 belongs to this KYC identity. Now, your threat model, that might not worry you so much because you're not particularly worried that whatever Coinbase is going to shut you down. You should be, but you're not. And that might not bother you. But I think that it's something that normally users shouldn't really have to worry about. But the reality of Bitcoin is that they do have to worry about that right now. We're doing a lot, though, on this in following updates. So we're working right now on a big update to Samourai Wallet, which includes mobile mixing. And as part of one of the updates that comes shortly after that, we'll be introducing something called Bad Bank. And what Bad Bank is another completely separate area of your wallet. Now, it's still part of your wallet. With your 12 words and your passphrase, you can still restore the Bad Bank. It's not custodial or anything like that. You're in control at all times. But it's just a separate derivation of your wallet to keep all of these things that could really trip you up away from your primary balance and away from your Whirlpool balance. So you have kind of 3 different areas within your wallet. And one of the really cool things about the toxic change, the TX0 change, is that it actually becomes really useful to use for certain types of transactions. because the assumptions are that each TX0 belongs to this one entity. Therefore, that you would make the assumption that if you had a transaction with the change outputs of two TX0s, those would be the same entity in one transaction, right? But that you can't necessarily say that because of transactions like Stowaway.
Got it. And what's a Stowaway?
So Stowaway is, we released this at the same time that we released Stonewall X2. It's a type of cahoots transaction because it's a peer-to-peer Coinjoin between two participants. It's also known in the industry as a PayJoin or as a pay-to-endpoint. We introduced it as Stowaway. So a Stowaway is a really cool transaction because it looks on the surface, if you look at it on the blockchain, it looks like a simple transaction. A simple transaction, what we refer to as a simple transaction, is two outputs.
Right, like two inputs, two outputs.
The number of inputs can be many. It can be hundreds of inputs, but two outputs. And output one or output zero could be the destination, and the second output would be the change back. That's the assumption that...
The typical assumption for a normal transaction.
For a simple transaction like that, where you have two outputs, it's generally accepted by most that that's likely to be destination and change, right? And all the inputs must belong to one person or one entity. So if you're a chain analysis company and that's your assumption, you're in for a real treat, because with Stowaway, we create simple transactions, but on the input side, those are two participants. Those are two separate entities. So if you're using your TX0 change, in particular on these Stowaways, you have TX0 from user 1 and TX0 from user 2, and then Stowaway destination. The cluster is completely wrong and completely broken. And what ends up happening is all Samourai Wallet users start to generate this giant cluster. And it's kind of cool because you can imagine these people, these chain analysis companies, encountering this cluster and being like, what do we do with this? How do we deal with this? Because we know that we cannot make any assumptions about the composition of these transactions.
I see, yeah. So essentially they have to either cluster you all together, and then the problem is if there are enough people doing stowaways with each other, then it just becomes too difficult to actually sort of pierce that veil.
But you can't tell. You wouldn't be able to know. Because since we released Stowaway, since the day we released Stowaway, that has meant that any transaction on the blockchain that has one input or that has two outputs, that could be a Stowaway.
Firstly, let's just summarize that. So the Stonewall is the one where you're using the algorithm and it's just you. Stonewall X2 is the one where, let's say, you and I are doing a transaction together to spend to somebody else.
Yep.
And then the Stowaway is a transaction between two Samourai Wallet users.
Between two users,
right.
Yeah. So I want to send you Bitcoin. I would do a Stowaway with you. With you and to you.
Gotcha. Yep. I guess the only part though is, and this comes up, we might as well go into it now. So wallet fingerprinting, right? So this is something where even if you are, from a network perspective, you use Tor and so on, and even, again, let's be clear, Tor is not a silver bullet, but let's say you use Tor and you were fine from a network perspective. Let's say you used Coinjoin techniques and you're fine from a transaction graph perspective. Another way by which you can be fingerprinted is certain ways that a wallet crafts a transaction. And some examples here would be the nlock time and sequence number and RBF signaling, RBF replaced by fee. So can you tell us a little bit of your thoughts on wallet fingerprinting?
That's absolutely right. Bitcoin Core has a fingerprint with nlock time +1, I believe it is what it is. Various wallets have fingerprints based on the way they order outputs in a transaction. Very, very early on, 2015, I believe, Christoph Atlas, who's a security researcher in Bitcoin, created BIP69, I want to say, which is a BIP that makes the sorting of inputs and outputs deterministic. So that is a way to try to combat the fingerprinting of wallet software based solely on the way they sort
That they order the outputs.
Right, exactly. Because at one point you would have something like, I think blockchain.info, they always put the destination as the first, the first output. Yeah, you really can't get around it. There is going to be fingerprinting. One thing that we've talked about at Samourai, we don't identify this as a huge problem, first of all, for us to solve, but we have talked about it. And one of the things we could do is have like profiles in the wallet. Say, hey, I want the wallet to emulate a Bitcoin Core wallet now, or I want it to emulate an Electrum wallet now. And whatever we can determine as Bitcoin Core fingerprint, which is the unlock time, or Electrum, which is, I'm not entirely sure, we could then simulate.
Right, and you can kind of bluff as that wallet.
Yeah, you could do that, and then, I mean, who cares if you're using Electrum or Wasabi or Bitcoin Core or something? Like, that's not a huge attack vector. It's a string to pull on for sure, but it's not like the main thing. In your example, the user, I think, is pretty well covered. If they're running their own node and they're going through Tor and they're doing all that sort of stuff, I think they'll be okay.
Gotcha.
They have much bigger issues.
Right,
with
they've got bigger
coin
problems.
selection and post-mix spending and stuff like that than to worry about wallet fingerprinting, I think.
Gotcha. And another topic I'm keen to touch on is coin selection. So obviously Stonewall is a big factor inside of that. And so again, for listeners who are not familiar, coin selection refers to, your wallet. Remember, your wallet is a keychain and it's got lots of different pieces of Bitcoin. And then coin selection relates to which of those pieces does it choose to spend. And so Samourai Wallet, you mentioned the Stonewall, which is like an algorithm that you can sort of cleverly merge different UTXOs in such a way that you're keeping track of things like scatter and fade and so on. And you mentioned you've got another coin selection algorithm coming called Solomon. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So like I said, Stowaway was very, very early innovation at Samourai. And it's still rather rudimentary, right? It doesn't remember past activity. When you do a Stonewall today, it's blind to the past, right? So a lot of stuff gets selected. UTXO say, oh, this one and this one there's no combination that these are connected. Therefore, I'll select these two, and then it will go forward. But it doesn't, other than not using UTXOs that have been seen together in the past.
Right, an input merge.
Yeah,
right?
An input merge. Besides doing that, which I think is just a basic thing that all wallets should aim to do, it's not that smart, if you understand what I mean. Solomon is the name of our upcoming UTXO selection algorithm that covers Stonewall, that covers Stowaway, and that covers some other types of transactions that we have coming down the line. So it's a more encompassing algorithm. And that's just the result of many years of development of these different algorithms finally converging to a point where it makes sense to replace these different algorithms with one overarching one. Sorry, I keep moving the mic.
Yeah, that's cool.
With one overarching one to tie everything together. So Solomon will remember a transaction that you've noted down, and Solomon will keep track of how much fade has been achieved since you noted that transaction down in relation to where you are today. And it will make intelligent choices on UTXO selection to maximize the scatter and fade of the transaction.
Yeah, and I like that approach as well, because it means the user has to do less thinking about their own UTXO set. And if we want Bitcoin to be a tool that is available to people who are not necessarily hardcore Bitcoin enthusiasts, like say you and I are, or many of my listeners. Let's be honest, it needs to be able to be used without such conscientious decision making about every single transaction. And if you can use an algorithm to sort of help make smarter decisions for you, then that's a good step. In my view.
The algorithm will be able to do it way better than you will.
Right. Even if you were Laurent MT or something like that.
Well, exactly. Like the algorithm is Laurent MT distilled into an algorithm. It's even better than Laurent. It's great, and it's a very good selection algorithm. And you'll get into trouble trying to manage this all yourself. It doesn't matter who you are. You will make mistakes. If your strategy relies on note taking, like labeling each transaction that you make, it's not sustainable. It's good for us, but it's not a long-term solution. And that's not a grandma argument I'm making, because I really hate the Bitcoin for grandmas argument. I'm not making that argument at all. I want hardcore users, but I don't think they have to be hardcore nerds. I want them to be hardcore about privacy. I want them to be hardcore about sovereignty. I want them to be hardcore about censorship resistance. I don't want them to have to, understand the complexities of UTXO management.
One other point with PayJoin or Stowaway, are there any thoughts or ideas you have on making that work across wallets? Or for example, if BTC Pay Server were to have a PayJoin way of the merchant offering the user some way of doing a PayJoin as a payment?
Yes. I think that's more of the idea around pay to endpoint, right? Because you're paying to the endpoint, as opposed to Stowaway, which is really about peer-to-peer. It's about two users interacting with each other, as opposed to a user and entity, merchant or something like that. I don't see merchants really taking that up. I don't see that as something merchants would be all that interested in doing. Maybe Darknet merchants, but you're more vanilla merchants. I don't. What incentive do they have to offer a pay joining service?
But I am hearing actually that some of the BTC Pay Server guys are interested in the idea of having PayJoin built into.
Oh
BTC
yeah, no,
Pay.
I'm sure they are, and I think that would be cool. I'm not opposed to it. I'm looking at it from a product perspective. If BTC Pay Server is targeting hobbyist Bitcoin users like us, or really, that's about it. Then that would be something cool that people would like. But at that point, you're just doing peer-to-peer. You're not actually doing anything with the merchant. You're just doing it peer-to-peer, and instead of you using Samourai, you're using BTC Pay Server as your client. Okay, that's cool. But look at a big merchant who uses BTC Pay Server is cheapair.com. Do you think they're going to offer PayJoin services when you buy, an airline ticket? I doubt it. Why would they?
Yeah, so potentially you're right. I don't know. Maybe they would. It depends on, I guess.
Can you imagine the risk
winds.
department?
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it really depends what way the prevailing winds are blowing on. Like, you're helping these,
Well,
dirty,
yeah, but not even just that. It's just an extra step of complexity.
Yeah, but I'm saying imagine if BTC Pay was literally like enable a checkbox, or if it was just on by default.
Yeah. More privacy is better, So I'm definitely not saying they shouldn't do this or it's a waste of time. Pay to endpoint, PayJoin, Stowaway. It's really, really cool. The type of transaction that creates is so powerful because it looks so innocent and there's no way of detecting it, and it completely breaks the data set of whoever includes it within their cluster. So however you get there, doesn't matter to me.
Right. And so I guess we can take it then that's, were that to occur, then Samourai Wallet would offer a way to pay and PayJoin with that.
They should contact us. We have a working implementation of Stowaway.
Yeah, that's the sad thing, right? We talk about some of these ideas, but right now, there are, as I know, there are only two implementations of PayJoin. It's join market to join market, and even then that's like a CLI thing, and Stowaway between two Samourai wallets. And so right now there's no way for you to PayJoin with somebody with a different wallet type to your own. And that's, to me, that's very limiting.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely is. But it's still very early tech, It's still very, very early tech, and you're going to have these sort of compatibility issues until you don't. I've talked with the join market guys. I talked to Belcher and Gibson, and I said, what can we do to, where can we meet in the middle and make some changes to both of our implementations so that they work together? And I think that makes the most sense, But I think it would be very rich for someone who hasn't implemented this tech to expect us to change our implementation to fit with theirs. So I think that if some developer is interested in implementing this type of technology, they should reach out to the existing stakeholders of the technology. So that would be Join Market and that would be Samourai. And that person would maybe even be the person to act as the one who bridges the three or all the services together and says, hey, what can we do so that Samourai and Join Market and Service X all work together? So, and I think that will happen naturally just as time progresses. We need to prove to the market right now that this is in demand.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
So
and that's the only way to do it.
yeah. So users, get out there and start doing some stowaways, hey?
And if they were, we wouldn't know. Remember that. We don't know. We don't. Well, first of all, it's not a premium feature. We don't charge for it or anything like that. So we don't have a way to keep track of how many people are doing stowaways or how many people are doing Stonewalls or anything like that. All you could do with Stonewalls, because you can find them on the blockchain, is write a script to try to find them. But stowaways, you can't. You know, the stowaway just looks like any ordinary average transaction.
Yeah, great point. And I guess one thing I'll just add here as well is that Chris Belcher and I think Adam Gibson has mentioned similar, that they've both mentioned as well that it doesn't take many PayJoin transactions to start really screwing up blockchain analysis across all of Bitcoin, so to speak.
Yes, since I don't remember, we released it so close together. I don't remember who released it first or whatever, or when the exact date. But whoever it was on that date changed the game. Because after that date, you cannot look at a transaction on the blockchain and know a simple transaction on the blockchain and know for certainty that this is a single participant and this is the destination and the change. You can't know that anymore for every single transaction that's occurred because there is no fingerprint on a stowaway. It looks like all the other transactions or on a PayJoin. So thereby, every other transaction on the network gets this cloak of protection.
Right. Yeah, and that's I think Adam Gibson has mentioned that as a steganographic technique.
Exactly.
That's the term he uses for that.
Exactly. And that's stowaway, PayJoin, pay to endpoint. It's a steganographic tool. That's a type of transaction it is. So you have decoy transactions, you have distance transactions like Ricochet, you have the pure mathematic transactions like Whirlpool, which is just brute force mathematics and combinations. You know, this is 10,000 combinations to get to this result, and that's pretty good. We'll go with that. You know,
yeah.
And then you have the Stonewall, like I said, which is a decoy type of transaction.
Also, so recently there's been this whole debacle around Wasabi Wallet getting flagged, right? So essentially, some users, so the two recent examples, which are, as I understand, to my knowledge, are the third and fourth cases that I know of. So there was, I can't remember the exact username, something like Catzalotl from Binance Singapore.
Cat, I think,
yeah. And then the other guy was Ronald McHoddled, I know it sounds silly, but these are their Twitter names, right? And so Ronald McHoddled was withdrawing from Paxos. And so it's kind of sparked up this whole debate about basically how easy is it to flag Coinjoin transactions. And I think, my perspective on it was, look, these are like an unforced error. Wasabi should not have had a fixed fee address. And in fairness to Wasabi, they are now changing that after like a lot of debate and a lot of time on this topic.
It doesn't matter now, though.
Yeah. And so
the impact has already been made. There's no going back from the years of, or more than a year of address reuse. It's tied into the architecture of the mixes now. So it's very good that they finally changed that, but it's not that really isn't going to do all that much.
Right. And I guess the next point then, and so again, it comes back to that question again, proximity versus, to the Wasabi fee address versus fingerprint, right? And so fingerprint is like, there was this kind of debate about, could a blockchain analysis person from the outside identify, oh, look, that looks like a Coinjoin because I can see there's, and so then there was this debate around.
There was no debate. There was an attempt to shift what happened and make a what if. Well, what if it was this thing that we know, everyone knows, all Coinjoin transactions, well, almost all, not stowaways, all Coinjoin transactions can be fingerprinted. Yeah, we know that. Everyone knows that. There's no one ever argued that wasn't the case. So this debate was a tactic to get people talking about something different than, hey, Wasabi has had this fixed fee address since the beginning and have been combative to anyone who has suggested that they change that. Only until this year. Only until, last week or something.
Yeah, very
So,
recent,
there was no debate. It was obviously proximity. It has nothing to do with fingerprint.
And I think the email that Katsalotl shared with some people, and I think he might have even tweeted this publicly, indicated that as well, because it was talking about it was like the email from the compliance department of Binance Singapore said something like, "Oh, you know this address, right?" And so it was very clear. Anyway, I think that aside, the broader point is more like there's a cat and mouse game here.
Yes,
and it's going to continually be occurring, right? So eventually it will probably get to the point where some exchanges or some chain spy companies will start flagging a transaction and flagging a customer merely for the use of, withdrawing from an exchange and then running through any type of Coinjoin, because they could code their software and their tools to identify that and flag that behavior.
Yeah, no, it's totally feasible that they could do that. The processing required to scan every incoming transaction or outgoing transaction and even performing one hop of history on it is quite a bit. That's quite a lot of processing, especially if you're at Binance, who are doing so many trades a day. So I don't think that's realistic. Is it possible? Yes. Could they build that system? Yes. Would it be worth the investment? Probably not. It's like anything else. These companies are regulated. They have no choice in the matter. They have to follow these certain regulations. They're not looking, unless you're a real established player, you're not looking to create harder, more difficult regulations for yourself, right? If you're like a Coinbase size, you might be doing that now to try to prevent competition entering this space, right? I think what exchanges will do is take the approach where it requires the least amount of investment and the least amount of work on their parts. And what that entails is contracting with a third-party service like Chainalysis or Elliptic or Crystal or one of the hundreds of these places, and relying on their tools and their risk assessment scores and their analysis. And these guys are not doing that. They're not scanning one hop back for everyone, because that's just crazy. So how do you deal with it? Like I said, we have tools, what we call distance tools, and that's about literally building distance. It's brute force distance between point A and point B. Can the exchanges look back and figure out that you did this? Of course they can. The blockchain is a public ledger. You can look back through anything and figure it out. Have we ever got a report that a Ricochet user has been flagged for using Ricochet? No, not in the entire time Ricochet's been around, because these exchanges aren't doing that. They're really going for a minimum approach to this.
The lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah, the lowest hanging fruit. And in the case of Wasabi, it's like your mixes are connected to one of the largest scams and Ponzi schemes in crypto history. It's enormous. And there is not even one hop of separation between your mixed UTXOs and this
plus token.
This plus token. There's not even a hop. You're in that transaction together. So that's the lowest hanging fruit. That's what they're going to go for. So that it has nothing to do with fingerprinting. No one's fingerprinting Wasabi transactions. You don't really even have to. They're so obvious, right? So it's not about that. It's absolutely proximity, and it's absolutely a distance thing. Yeah, and the tools that we're building around include distance, but also make it, again, so that if an analysis company encounters a Samourai transaction, encounters a Stonewall, encounters a Stonewall or a Whirlpool, it just is easier to put it to the side and deal with it later. Otherwise, it's going to pollute our current transaction graph, which in the state of Bitcoin wallets in 2020 is pathetic, right? Privacy is not even a second or third rate feature. It's way down there for most wallets out there, right? So they have a great transaction. They have pretty good certainty as to who owns inputs, outputs, not identity, but which inputs go to which outputs.
Linked, right?
Right. So they have very good graphs of that. Adding Samourai stuff into that mix would just make it a mess. Yeah, their confidence goes from 90 to 80 to 70, and that's a big drop.
Yeah, and I guess it comes down to like, could they present that in court, or would it be good enough for that? And probably not, because the probability that this is an accurate view of what's actually going on inside of all of that.
Yeah, well, and it's a really, really good point. Like, would that hold up in court? Because at the end of the day, this is all, like I said, based on math. This is all based on probabilities. So we could mathematically prove that the probability that this input is connected to this output is like 13%. Does that meet the standard of proof, or where is that lie? And that's going to be something that's going to happen eventually. The court system will encounter that, and there will be a decision based on that.
Right. And so this also comes to this question of deterministic links versus probabilistic links, and just kind of no real linkability, let's call it. And so I think some of this also flows from the Coinjoin Sudoku sort of analysis, and also like related is this subset sum analysis idea. And it's just like this idea that you can sort of, if you're looking at the inputs and the outputs, and which one could have paid which output, and this is what kycp.org is trying to get at. So can you tell us a little bit about your views there on deterministic links and avoiding those in your mixer and in your general day-to-day transaction behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. So KYCP, you mentioned, it's a web service built on top of Boltzmann, which is, you can kind of consider Boltzmann the predecessor to Solomon. Okay, and what Boltzmann does is it looks at a transaction that's you've either broadcast or you want to broadcast, and it scores it based on the linkability, deterministic linkability between input to output. And a deterministic link is 100% linkability. So there's no question about it. There's no other way that this input, the mappings of this input to this output. So it's connected. What we try to do with Samourai, with Stonewall, is by adding more inputs and outputs than necessary, and by including like amount sizes on the output side, what that does is mathematically make it impossible or very difficult to say with 100% certainty that these inputs connect to these outputs. So you might have a certainty of 33%. You might have a certainty of even less, and that's where the score of entropy comes from. So when you in the Samourai Wallet, when you're able to enable Stonewall, it will tell you, oh, this Stonewall has like 3 bits of entropy, or this Stonewall has 1.5 bits of entropy, which is like the lowest amount of entropy a Stonewall can have. And all that means is the number of combinations between inputs and outputs is higher or lower. That's all. So a 3-bit entropy transaction means that the probabilities that you're able to link a specific input to a specific output of that transaction is very low. I don't remember what the exact probability is for that, but KYCP will show you the probabilities. So if you pop your transaction in there, it will tell you input 0 is connected to input 1 at a rate of 25% if you're using Samourai, or 100% if you're using just a standard wallet.
Yeah. And so just for listeners who aren't familiar, or if you have never used Samourai Wallet, the recommendation is, as we mentioned before, when you come out of the Whirlpool mix, that you should use a Stonewall spend as a minimum level, and you'll see that little toggle when you go to spend of, yes, my wallet can construct a Stonewall, or no, it cannot, because you're trying to spend too much, or your UTXO set is not, let's say, compatible, or does not have the right level of inputs to make that transaction.
Or the inputs have been seen together or something.
That's right. Because it could be
there's so many rules.
You might be doing an input merge and so on. I think there is a gist where I think TDEV has written out the exact activation conditions for a Stonewall for those more technical users who are interested.
Yeah, and even that's now kind of out of date with Solomon coming out. So we will have better documentation than a gist for that. But overall, that's kind of the idea. Like, if you don't have enough UTXOs in your wallet, you won't be able to create Stonewall, just because you can't do it. Right now in the wallet, there's not a lot of user feedback. The user doesn't really get told why they can't compose a Stonewall. That's something we could do better on, and giving the user more indication saying, hey, if you do this, this, and this, you might be able to compose a Stonewall, that sort of thing. Just a little bit of help.
Yeah, and for example, right now, it's a little difficult to know how much could I do a Stonewall with,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
so let's say I'm sitting in my wallet with, I don't know, let's say 1 million sats in my Postmix wallet, let's say. And typically, as you've mentioned before, you usually need to spend a little bit less than half of your balance. But again, depends on what
really
UTXOs you've got and
yeah.
so on. So it kind of, even that is, it's not an easy science. So let's talk a little bit about running Dojo. So for listeners who are unfamiliar, Dojo is like running your own little server. You're running your own server and you're checking your own balances, whereas most Bitcoin wallets will check against a central server, or they will just query out to the SPV, the broader Bitcoin network. So on the topic of Dojo, we've seen now more and more people are using Dojo. So can you tell us a little bit about current development on Dojo and where you see that going?
Yeah, sure. So Dojo, I think we're at version 1.4, 1.5 now. I know that we have a version that's ready for release any day now, so I don't remember which one. And it's such a great project because we run Dojo at Samourai Wallet. So if you just get Samourai Wallet from the Play Store and install it, you're using our instance of Dojo. That's what it's being powered by. And nothing stops you from going, actually, I want to run my own copy of that. So it's such a powerful server, and it's such a powerful piece of software that, it powers all of our users without a hiccup, and it's definitely going to power, your 2 or 3 wallets that you register onto it on your Raspberry Pi, and it'll do a real smooth job of it. So I think what we want to do with Dojo is have it be the home base, the platform for our users who choose to go down that route. And we want it to be as easy as possible for users to choose to go down that route. We don't think that every user needs to do that. There's just going to be some that don't want to have the hassle of managing a node and hassle of having to do updates and security stuff, and they don't want to, and they're fine trusting Samourai not to lie to them, which is what it comes down to. Samourai could lie to you. Samourai could say you have 1 million Satoshis, but you don't. Right? If you don't run your own node, that is the risk, and that's not a concern for everyone. But for those who it is a concern for, we have the software for you, and that's Dojo. So it's been mostly, I would say, 90% of Dojo has been community pushed. We put out the software, we released it, and have kind of stepped back and just said, "You guys make this a thing." Because we don't have the resources to support it. We don't have the resources to run technical support and stuff on that product. We're barely doing it enough with Samourai Wallet. So you got guys like BTC Zelko, Gara Moneta, and just the Crazy K, the whole crew of the Ronin Dojo guys. They've taken what we've done in Dojo, they've forked it, but not changed the project. Just added on top of it, and they've made it extremely user-friendly. Extremely user-friendly to run on a Raspberry Pi. They have it so like even if you have Windows, you can get it running. Like they're all about opening up access to this product and to this ecosystem, making it just as accessible to anyone. And
I'm a big fan of Ronin Dojo. As listeners might know, I run one myself, and I use the Ronin Dojo variant or specific one, and so big shout out to Zelko and Gura Moneta for that, and Crazy K for some of the documentation and helping users with it. I do recommend that's a good way to use it, and I think the other cool thing is you can run one for your family, right? So you don't necessarily have to have everyone in the family able to use command line and set up a Ronin Dojo. You can have just one person set it up, and then the other people in the family can just pair their Samourai Wallet on their phone with the Dojo on their Raspberry Pi or etc.
Exactly, and that kind of solves for that use case of person who doesn't want to deal with the security updates, doesn't want to deal with having to run their own node. If they have like a savvy family member or someone that they can who will run a node for them, then the experience for them is no different really than installing Samurai from the Play Store and running it, right? Like, but all they have to do is scan a QR code and then they're connected to, their son's node or whatever.
Right, yeah. Or I think the Tales from the Crypt guys refer to this as the Uncle Jim's node, right? So Uncle Jim runs the node for the family, and
definitely an Uncle Jim.
So if
thing,
we need an Uncle Jim in every family.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to Dojo, I guess we've also got to talk about the impact of Dojo use on Whirlpool, right? So this is that whole thing around, okay, what percentage of Whirlpool users doing Coinjoins are using Dojo, using their own node? And so I guess let me just kind of summarize the concern from the community just so you can sort of speak to it. One of the concerns that you see on Bitcoin Twitter and elsewhere is this idea that, oh no, if not enough people are using Dojo and it goes mainstream with mobile mixing, then some of those users might theoretically be doxing their mixed addresses to the Samurai central server. Now that's the concern. It's around it also sort of, yeah, I guess it also ties into how many people are using Dojo. Now, I haven't seen the latest statistics, but as I understand, it's like over 60%.
Yeah, it's been over 60% for the last few weeks now.
Right.
And it hovers between 60 to 62%.
Yeah. And so even taking that number as it is right now, that already is above the threshold. As I understand, you need, I think it's 2 Dojo users in every mix or something like that. And then beyond that, you don't actually have to trust
I saw someone came up with that figure of what you need. I didn't verify it myself. To me, the whole thing is concern trolling, so I'm not concerned about that. We have Dojo; it's out there. Use it. If you're concerned about us knowing your xpubs or anything like that, then use Dojo. It's fine. And regarding regarding Whirlpool, we have never ever design this system where we're the adversary, right? The adversary is chain analysis companies using public blockchain data. Okay, so in this threat model where we are the adversary, what we have is knowledge about chain or off-chain data, right? We know what you don't know just by looking at the chain. We know more than you because you don't know by looking at a Whirlpool transaction, which users are Dojo users and which users aren't. You have no idea. So really, you have to trust that the 60% that I'm saying is even true, right? So this whole thing is just, to me, it was, again, a way of changing the conversation, putting the conversation somewhere else to say, okay, yeah, you released Dojo, but it's not enough. Now no one's going to run it. You need all these people to run it to make it worthwhile. And it's like, okay, I'm less and less concerned with the Twitter guys who have never built anything, who have never deployed anything, who just sit and have an opinion about stuff that is just completely uninformed, So I don't really worry about that at this point, because I know the software we're building is actually having an immediate impact on the users who it was meant for. The users who we built this software for are using it. The users are using Whirlpool, and they are using Stonewalls, and they're using ricochets. They're using it all. They're using everything the way it was designed, and that's as an entire platform, an entire ecosystem. So the rumblings on crypto Twitter or whatever really don't concern.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, speaking from my perspective, as an like an interested observer, and again, I'm a fan of Samourai Wallet. I see it like, to me, it seems like the goalposts are just ever shifting. It's
Always.
sort of just like, oh yeah, you did this thing, but now this is the new goalpost, and if you're not meeting this goalpost, then like you're just not good enough. And it's like, I don't know, like we're in this open source environment, and ultimately you can either build something yourself, or you can pay someone to develop something that you like, or you just put up with it. Like don't use it, right? These are our options, and I think people have to, I don't know, to me it seems a little bit like everyone's trying to dictate everyone else's product roadmap or plan. And to me,
that's a very Twitter thing. That's a very Twitter thing is, and it's not just about Bitcoin. It exists in every subculture, in every community on the internet. If you've been around the internet long enough, you've seen this same behavior pop up in IRC channels. You've seen this same behavior pop up all over the place. So it's not crypto related. It's not Bitcoin related. It's a people problem. And to me, you just have to deal with it. You just have to be strong and know. You have to know as a product person, you have to know that what you're doing is right on the product side. You just have to know it. And whether Livera gets it, whether this guy on Twitter gets it, whether Mr. Huddle gets it in his shirt store, doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to build the software. If you want to use it, use it. And it's as simple as that. And definitely will not be dictated to on how to build this.
Yep. Let's talk about mobile mixing. So this is a feature that's coming, and I have had the opportunity to be a part of the testing group as well. So it's kind of in an early testing stage. Now, I think it's pretty cool in that it can really expand the number of users who might feel like, oh, it's too much work to install a desktop app, and maybe they just want to do a mobile phone version. So can you tell us a little bit about mobile mixing and how that's going?
Sure. Well, it's that's been the day one goal when we started Samourai from the first day, which was actually around this time in 2015. It was ultimate goal was to get mixing on mobile. And it's taken a long time and a lot of foundation, but we are pretty much there. So as you know, we have quite a small closed testing group, which is designed primarily to just hit the protocol level stuff of the mixing on mobile hard. Make sure that Android isn't killing the service, make sure that you're able to mix properly, make sure that remixing kind of works, make sure that all of the little things that just are unknown because no one's ever done mixing on mobile before. And it's quite a difficult thing to pull off. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of communication going back and forth between the coordinator and the wallet. And of course, it's not clear text communication. It's all like Chaumian payload stuff going back and forth. So these are big packets. The whole thing is quite, mixing can just take a while right now, especially with low liquidity. Whirlpool's doing fine. It's doing all right, but it's nowhere near the levels of what we think it's going to be at full release. So you're just waiting around, and latency isn't a friend of mobile. In mobile, especially since Android 6, Google has been killing background processes and killing background services. So having all that stuff going on mobile at once is a challenge in regards to mixing. But I think we're pulling it off, and I think we're getting close to a release that will initially, I think, be more focused on rapid fire one round mixes, right? Where you go from TX0 to premix and premix to postmix. So you mix once from start to finish. And what we should do, I think, is then try to push people onto the desktop app and say, hey, you can get free remixes over and over and over again. And yeah, you could do that on mobile, but who wants to sit there with their phone open for days? Go just put this on desktop, just let it sit there and run. And I think we'll be able to onboard not, a huge number of our user base who are very much mobile only, but I think we'll be able to capture a few of those guys to say, okay, let me go ahead and connect this to the desktop app so that I can have free remixing on all of these things constantly going on, and use the mobile app when I just want to do a rapid fire initiation of a mix.
So the idea is you might kind of tick off the mix and it'll just run on from then, and you won't have to sit around kind of like keeping the app open.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do it. I've been testing that use case. I've been testing it, the Whirlpool mobile app, as running it as a service running all the time. And my findings are, in fact, that if you wish to do this, it's best to do so on Android 6.0, because that was the last version before Google started removing background processes and stuff like that. Where I've had the app running for like three or 4 days now, and it's just been doing great. On Android 7 and 8 and 9, you need to go into settings, disable background data restrictions, and disable battery optimization for the app. And after you do that, then you get a pretty decent experience for long-term use. And I'm talking, more than an hour or so in this. For normal activity, you just launch the app, press go, and it should happen fairly quickly.
I guess we should remember that if that user is already running Whirlpool CLI, which is basically that's offered as part of Ronin Dojo. So if you just want the easy setup, use that. But as we should understand that those users already using CLI don't really have to worry that much about it anyway, because they've already got the remixing coming from that anyway. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So you could have CLI running on your home server. You can have the desktop app connected to your CLI on your laptop or whatever, and you can have mobile app all connected to the same Whirlpool instance, all connected in the same wallet, never mixing with itself, never doing anything weird like that. So it's just all tied in. It's not 100% tied in, unfortunately, and that's just a time thing. We need more time to get everything connected up, because if you create a note, for example, on your mobile UTXO list and say, hey, this Whirlpool UTXO, I want it to be note ABCD. When you go onto the desktop app, that note won't exist there, because that is all local to the device, to the client. We don't have a server where that gets sent to that then the other clients can pull it down from. We just don't have that. So there is some elements that are disjointed, but the core functionality, the core thing of mixing, it will work across all of the platforms at any given time.
Another cool thing, another two things I want to mention with the mobile mixing version. So again, as I've had an opportunity to play with the new version, I've noticed that there is now there's now coin selection, and you can select an individual UTXO, whereas in the past you had to do it by reverse. So you had to basically select every other UTXO, go do not spend, and then spend. Now you've actually got the option where when you want to spend, you can select this UTXO and spend the full amount, or only spend from that UTXO and then take back the rest as change. So that's a pretty cool feature.
Honestly, it's my favorite of this release. I'm super excited for Whirlpool. Obviously, like I said, it was day one. We wanted to get that done, and I'm going to be very happy when it's out there. But the UTXO list, I am not able to use the previous version that we had with the do not spend, and you have to flag everything. It's so much better with the new UTXO list, and I think that's just a product of using the wallet every day. If you use the wallet a lot, if you transact a lot, you will end up with a lot of UTXOs. Yeah, you're just, especially if you're stonewalling, right? Because a stonewall will create extra UTXOs. So you're going to have a lot, and then managing all those UTXOs, like you said, you have to go through. Let's say you have 100 UTXOs.
Yeah, it's just too time consuming, right?
You have to go 99 of them, and I've done it. That's the thing. I've done it, and I've gone through that pain. And when you walk through that kind of hassle, you go, okay, I need to fix this for our users because this is crazy.
Yeah.
So what we have now, I think, is really, really cool. I like that.
The other really cool thing that I like is Multi-TX0 or Multi-UTXO TX0. So currently, for users who are not familiar, you would have to select a single UTXO and then push that through the normal Whirlpool process. Now, you might have 3 or 4 pieces of UTXO and push them all through a Whirlpool with this new mobile mixing feature.
Lower fees for you. That's what that ends up being.
Yeah,
lower fees for the user.
Is that something you intend to bring on the desktop version as well?
I would like that. The desktop version is very basic. It's just a lack of resources. We have one developer who's working on Whirlpool primarily, and he's done the desktop GUI, did the CLI, and he's done all the protocol work and everything. So he's a jack of all trades in that respect. So we just haven't had the time to really flesh that out. We have had an open source contributor on the Whirlpool GUI, Pavel he's contributed to various open source projects. I think he's contributed to BTC Pay and Blue Wallet and stuff like that. He has started contributing to Whirlpool GUI, and I think that you'll see some really interesting things coming down the line in terms of getting that really nicely refined.
Yeah.
So I have no aversion to bringing that particular functionality into the desktop app. We didn't do it to maximize our fee revenue or anything like that. It was just easier to do a simple selection. The other thing about mobile that's different from desktop is you can mix from any address type. It doesn't have to be SegWit. It doesn't have to be Bech32.
Right. So you can mix from a 1 address or from a 3 address.
Yeah, exactly. And all together in one TX0. So you could say, oh yeah, this one, and this one. All right, add those to the mix. So it's a nice, it's a nice upgrade for users who are doing that anyway, because they realize that, okay, if you're paying per TX0,
they had to merge themselves.
Right. I might as well merge it beforehand, so I only pay one TX0, which is obvious. Well, we just made it so they didn't have to do that step in, where we could just merge it for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess as well for a merchant, let's say they're receiving lots of little chunks and none of them are, let's say, over that 0.01 threshold, then they're kind of stuck, right? So they have to do a merge. But now with the multi-UTXO TX0, again, that's a bit of a mouthful.
Yes.
But you can merge it all as part of your TX0 and then kick off your mixing process from there. So you kind of skip a step, if you will.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It makes it a little easier.
Yeah. So that's cool. One other thing, I guess, from let's zoom out more and just talking about Bitcoin's blockchain and the bloating UTXO set and so on. What's your view around that with, there might be cross purposes, right? So somebody who's more concerned about cheapness of fees and not privacy at all, they might think, oh, hey, I want to have all my UTXOs into one, and whereas, let's say, the Samourai kind of model of using Stonewall and including additional inputs makes transactions larger. And also the use of all these additional, there's all these pieces of UTXOs out there. How do you think about that? Is that just something that, well, that's just the cost you pay for privacy?
Yeah. Privacy has a cost. It's as simple as that. Things will come down the pike that reduce the impact on chain. You'll have things coming down like Schnorr and Taproot that impact that or have the ability to impact that going forward. But ultimately, we have to realize that privacy does have a cost, and it is more expensive to be private, and that's just how it is. And I think I find people who sit there worrying about the size of the TXO set to be basically in the same camp as the big blocker guys who sit there and worry about the size of the blocks. It's like, get something real to worry about.
Yep. And as I understand, the view from some of the Samourai guys is a bit more like maybe people have this kind of 2017 PTSD that we're going to see massive fee pressure really soon.
Yeah.
And I think it depends on your view on whether there was a lot of spamming of the chain in 2017 by certain actors who may have wanted to push, let's say, Bcash or SegWit2x, whether any of those actors were doing this kind of spamming of the chain. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's even up for debate. I think it's very, very clear that they were. Laurent MT has done phenomenal research on this. He called it the Moby Dick, tracking Moby Dick. And this was an entity that he discovered via use of OXT, which is our analysis platform. And he's been able to connect the dots between this entity and various other economic actors who at the time of that scaling war or whatever would have been pushing for larger blocks. So yeah, I think that was an entirely manufactured crisis. Entirely. And it was both successful and unsuccessful. I don't think it was successful in what they were trying to achieve, which was to get obviously larger blocks. I think it was successful in warping the, how do I put this? In warping the perceptions around the Bitcoin network, because that lasting legacy of the fee pressure, and we can't have a repeat of the fiasco of 2017 or whatever. Well, if you were transacting during that time, it really wasn't that bad. Like you had to go and look at what the mempool was doing, which you don't have to do that really all that often now. You had to go and check it out. But if you had a wallet like Samourai, you were bragging to people that you were only paying 20 sat fees and still getting confirmed, while these idiots were paying 300, 400 sats, right? So it was an entirely manufactured crisis. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners now are latching onto that in order to pump Lightning.
Right. And so I guess this comes to your skepticism a little bit around Lightning. And let's stay on this fee topic for a second, though. So the view from that kind of person might be, look, next time we have a bull market, we're going to have another fee crisis, and it's going to be just as bad, and everyone's going to be paying huge fees for on-chain transactions. And I guess your view is more like, no, actually, that 2017 stuff was overly artificially pumped, and so even if we did have a bull run, it won't get so bad, is your view?
Well, I mean, it might. I mean, we might hit fee rates of a couple hundred sats a byte. I mean, I don't know. What I saw in 2017 was a fee market trying desperately to cope without having any market mechanism, without having any sort of way to actually price itself, I just saw a market system that really had no chance of succeeding. And that was because it wasn't a real event. And under a real event where you don't have a certain actor spamming the chain and introducing a bunch of false pressure, I think that we would see a different play out. We would still have people waiting. That might be okay. You might not need to be confirmed in the next block. And I think we would, this is all in the case of a real event of mass adoption, like a real event of mass adoption, which I don't personally see coming anytime soon. But if it did come, I think that it would take a little bit of time, but not that much time, but a little bit of time before people's behavior shifted. And the way they thought about how they make transactions shifted. And they go, do I need to be in the next block? Is my transaction actually urgent? Or can I wait? I also would expect to see better pricing mechanisms around just how much. Why 300 sats a byte, right? Like, why 500 sats a byte? Is it because of the amount of transactions in the mempool? Is it because of there's all these different variables. And I would like to see better pricing mechanisms built out. And the only way that's going to happen is if there's an actual fee market taking place, organically being derived. So you can't centrally plan these things. You have to just kind of see how it plays out. But I'm not worried about it. I don't think that there's anything to worry about with on-chain fees. Fees will go high and then they'll go low. And eventually fees will have to go high, right? Once the block subsidy is done, the block reward's done.
Right, and most of it will be done in, let's say, 10 to 15 years-ish. Yeah. I can't remember the exact numbers.
You really want a market to develop before that point.
Oh, of course, yeah.
You really want something developed before that point. So, honestly, the sooner the better in terms of a real fee event, so we can kind of figure out how this all works. But I don't know. I think that, again, there's bigger things to worry about. Right. So I'm not worried about.
Yeah, and so I guess is that your view also on Lightning? Is that you think it might be interesting, but it's just not worth your time right now? How do you think about it?
I think Lightning's interesting from as a technical project. I think it's very interesting. I don't think it's interesting for Samourai, and I don't actually necessarily think it's all that interesting for Bitcoin in general. The way I see it is Lightning was forced down our throats as the scaling solution. There is no other option. 2017 came, we were in crisis mode. We hit all-time highs on the chain. We need a solution, and the solution is Lightning. I never bought that. It's a solution. Why is it the chosen one? To me, I never could get behind that. Is it interesting for Samourai? No, certainly not. It's too early. It's way, way, way too early. And as I've watched the ecosystem grow, as I've watched the companies grow out of Lightning Network and around Lightning Network, and what I would call the native Lightning companies, as opposed to getting the companies that got started on main chain and then graduated up to Lightning. The native Lightning companies, they kind of disgust me, to be honest. They're all about KYC and custody. They don't, that's to them, that isn't a red line. Whereas to me, I wouldn't even conceive of publishing an app whereby users we had custody of user funds. Would never even conceive it. And I know that in 2013, had anyone come up with such a proposal, they would have been laughed out of town. Let's put it that way, because that's such a dirty word, such a red line. Where now in Lightning Network land, people go, yeah, but it will get better. Yeah, but that's only custody right now. When we get this fixed, it won't be anymore. And it's like, when does it work that way?
So, and the other one, I guess that you people might say is, oh, but it's only for small amounts, right? Like only $30.
It's only a little bit. It's only for a little bit. Okay, so what's the point? So is Square or PayPal and Cash App and all these guys. You can do the same thing. So why not do it there? At least those guys, who they are. You're not some rando on Twitter. So to me, it's just not interesting. There's really zero interest. Like, people getting excited about using fiat on your Lightning network, swapping this, and to me, it's like, oh, who cares? But that's just me. And there are going to be people who do care, and those people need to be able to work on that stuff. And I've always said this. I have been critical and harsh on Lightning Network, but I've never been critical and harsh on the people building a Lightning Network because they're just building. They're just builders. So. As a protocol, I'm not all that interested. As a network, I'm not that interested. I'm happy to see people working on it. I'm happy to see a lot of UX development happening there, which makes sense because you could do a lot of UX is a lot easier when you're dealing with custody, and you're dealing when you can hide a lot of concepts, complicated concepts that you just can't hide if you're a non-custodial wallet.
Yeah, so again, I guess I'm optimistic on Lightning. I accept though that it is early. I've seen personally, I see a lot of development has happened over the last year or so, but absolutely, it's still early. There's a lot of work still to be done. Ideally, we want to get to that vision of having like Schnorr and Taproot, and then having stuff like L2 and stuff like that, and also like that idea of point time locking and so on to help privacy. I would love to see a world where we could sort of use techniques across both, right? So as an example, you could have like a wallet that's using Coinjoins, but then also use the Coinjoin funds to open your Lightning channels. But I suppose in your view, it's just too early for that sort of thinking.
I mean, from a product level, I'd say why? Who's that serving? Is that serving, 5,000 guys on Twitter? Or is that serving is that serving the Darknet market guys? I don't think so.
Potentially it could, couldn't it?
I mean, let me know when one of them implements Lightning Network.
Right.
And then we'll talk.
Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. I think that's it can get, and this is something I'm also careful about as well, is making sure to not oversell things, because there are merchants who try to do it and sometimes run into problems on getting inbound liquidity or just setting it up correctly. So I am sort of careful to not like push that aspect of it too hard, while at the same time being enthusiastic on it. Another thing I've seen, to switch up a little bit, you've mentioned some thoughts on Liquid. So I think this is one of those things where from my perspective, I see benefits in certain use cases, right? If you're an exchange or a trading desk, absolutely. 100%. Liquid, 2 of 3 out of the 15 function areas makes total sense. But there are also other ways that you might view Liquid or even criticize Liquid if users are not being sold the right story or being kind of sold the wrong message. Do you see that in Liquid at all, or is your criticism something different?
No, I think that's pretty accurate, and I agree with you. I think that there is a use case for Liquid. There's an absolute use case for Liquid, and you'd be crazy to say there isn't. However, what I don't understand is why they don't appear to be going for that use case. They appear to be going after a consumer market, which to me makes zero sense. But who am I? I'm not on their team or anything like that. So I'm just one of those guys who are commenting, right? My big issue, though, is I've seen certain big personalities whose voices are respected and whose voices are listened to by the wider kind of community there, saying that Liquid is Bitcoin and Liquid is just as good, or Liquid is just as good as having Bitcoin, or Liquid is better than Bitcoin because you have all these privacy enhancements on top. And this to me is dangerous. And it's not the fault of Blockstream for people saying that about their product. They can't control what other people say. If one of their own employees is saying that, which I have seen, that's a different story. But let's just forget about that. On the broader scale, it's not really, they can't control what people are saying about their tools that they build. But I think that this falls on users. This doesn't fall on Blockstream. That's the thing. This falls on users. Users need to ask themselves, is it custodial? Can I get out of it just as easy as I get into it? And can anyone prevent me from getting out of it? Those questions have to be asked. And if you ask those questions and answer honestly, then it's very, very clear that it's nothing like Bitcoin at all.
Yeah. And so a parallel, Lightning Bitcoin is Bitcoin. And I think it's fair to say so because at any given point, to have a Lightning channel, you have a pre-signed commitment transaction, which may be broadcast to the blockchain, and that can be, trust minimized or trustlessly settled back into your own Bitcoin wallet, and it's full reserve. With Liquid Bitcoin, however, it's fair to say, it's peg in. However, as you mentioned, I think the potential risk is having a permissioned peg out system.
Correct.
And that's fundamentally the risk. And so I guess the risk would be, so there are 15 functionaries, and I believe there are members as well. But I think the key point here is the 15 functionaries, and I think it's 2/3. So I think it's 11 out of 15 must sign the peg out request. And so that is potentially where the permissioning, we don't know.
We started the conversation with Binance Singapore and Paxos closing down people's accounts because of proximity to a Ponzi scheme address plus by plus token. So we know what exchanges are going to do. If an exchange receives an order to not release the funds, to freeze funds because they're the result of an active investigation, then we know what the exchange is going to do because they do it today. They will freeze it. And not one of those functionaries or whatever they're called is going to vote to release your funds. And that's just how it is. And that makes sense on an institutional level, when it's institutions dealing with institutions, when it's exchanges dealing with exchanges. Totally understand it. Totally get it. They're stakeholders in their consortium, right? They signed up to this. They're at the table. They're impacted by this deal. They can negotiate different rules for different, roles within the organization. But you're a user. You have zero say in any of this. So when you're just as a user using Liquid, I don't understand what that end game is. Why they're targeting users for this clearly enterprise product. But that's just, again, my personal ruminating on something.
Sure. One other point I could see, and I think Max Tannehill was mentioning this idea as well, of what might make a little bit more sense for Liquid, not necessarily the LBTC case, but potentially using Liquid for Tether. And so potentially I could see maybe a retail use there where, let's say, a newsagent, like just down the road, they want to be able to sell, and so what they could start doing is selling Tether to people just on the street for cash, and then that person could now use that Tether to try and buy Bitcoin, and potentially that's a case that might make sense. What's your view?
I saw a little bit of that go by on Twitter. I've been too busy this week to keep track of that particular debate, just because I don't know much about Tether. I've never used a stablecoin before, and I don't. I actually talked to Max and asked him like some basic questions, embarrassingly, like, can you get Tether without doxing yourself? Can you? Because I just didn't know. So I try to stay away from commenting on that sort of stuff when I just have no idea.
Yeah, sure.
If you can use Tether in a way where it doesn't compromise your identity via KYC system, and if you're able to withdraw your Tether without someone giving you permission, and if you realize at the end of the day that Tether can just vanish, It's not outside the realm of possibility. I think it's less likely as time goes on, but we thought that with Gox too. So it can happen. So users should be aware of that. I don't 100% follow the voucher thing, because we have Bitcoin vouchers today. So I don't know why you would go and get a voucher for Tether, which you then go and get
through some exchange or whatever.
Yeah, Bitcoin for. But I think what I did see Max was arguing for was that actually, let's talk about like the people in China. I think that's what he used. People in China rather hold, who are into crypto, rather hold a Tether dollar than their own currency. Right, and it's much easier to get a Tether dollar than it may be to get a US dollar, which then you have to store. Right, you have to put it under the mattress. You have to convert it into gold or something. You have to do something like that. Whereas the Tether dollar is just, it's there.
Right, so that might be an option for them. Okay, fair enough.
And I didn't know, if there's some sort of underground economy with Tether. I don't know. And these are all things that would impact my opinion, would influence my opinion on the whole thing. But overall, I'm not interested because there is that risk, right? There is counterparty risk. You have the risk that Tether just disappears.
Yeah, gotcha. I guess for those people, maybe they're thinking, I'll just use it as a temporary pass-through and just quickly buy Bitcoin, and once I've got my Bitcoin, then I'm good, right? Different ways.
What it's for? Like, that's what, again, I'm really stupid on this stuff because I've just never been interested in that sort of thing. But isn't the whole point of Tether was so that you could get virtual US dollars so you could jump between exchanges?
That was a big part of it. And I think what it happened in practice, though, was some people who were facing some form of capital controls or currency controls in China ended up using it also. So I think that was
their thing, right? So to me, that's pretty cool because those are users. They're using virtual currency or digital currency in the way that we want Bitcoin to be used. It's a censorship-resistant money. And why are they using Tether? We need to figure that out.
Oh, so Tether's coming to Samourai Wallet soon, guys. No. I'm joking. I know it's never coming. I'm joking.
You know what you're going to start now.
No. Let's turn it back to just privacy more broadly and sort of finish it up. Where do you see the hope for users who want to try and maintain their privacy going forward in a world where it's becoming harder and harder to first acquire that Bitcoin without KYC? Is it Bisq and HODL, or is it the family and friends trading network, or is it earning Bitcoin, or is it mining Bitcoin? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a tough question. I think it's a combination, really. It's a combination of them all. I think some are more effective than others. For me, it's been earning. Before Samourai, it was still earning in Bitcoin. It's just finding what you can do and just putting yourself out there and hustling to try to get a job in the industry. I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to do that in 2020 than it was to do that in 2013. So I really don't want to hear any excuses of, I can't find a job, because there are so many companies in Bitcoin that are hiring. There was a lot of money that was invested in Bitcoin companies, and if you want a job, you can probably find one if you have value to add. So earning is definitely a huge one. Family, friends, yes. Meetups, I think, are a really good place to be able to do some, relatively low value transactions. Probably no more than, $1,000 or something is what I would do at a meetup. But that's a good way to meet people who, might be in the opposite situation of you. So you might want Bitcoin, but they might have Bitcoin and they need to get rid of it because they're like me and they need to eat. So that's, I think, a very valid way. And mining, mining, it's one part of the ecosystem that I never engaged with, because we were being told even back when I got started that you're a fool if you wanted to mine, because it was just impossible now. But I'm starting more to think that was just the narrative put out there by the miner.
Right. Oh, it's so hard. Don't join my business.
It's impossible.
Oh, it's too hard.
But whatever. I don't know. But yeah. I know a few guys who hang out in the Samourai Telegram room who have relatively recently started mining, which is that's kind of crazy. You're really going up against some massive,
like multi-million-dollar funded companies.
But that's cool. That's awesome that they're doing it, and they've been happy, and they have been receiving, a small stream of Bitcoin. And these are not miners that are looking to sell at the end of, when they receive some coins. They're doing it to hold. So they're less interested in the, am I making a profit on the amount of electricity that I'm
Gotcha. Yeah,
spending?
that's a smart point.
And I'm more interested in acquiring Bitcoin without anyone, knowing.
Without KYC.
Yeah.
Right. So you might theoretically think, hey, I can't mine them at par in terms of the cost. But if I'm just kind of taking a bit of a loss on the electricity and the maintenance and all these other costs, but I'm getting KYC through Bitcoin, well, that's...
Yeah, and you presumably believe there's some upside potential, right? So,
if they are able to speculate, right? So if they could say, okay, can I cop the operating costs for half a year, and then if I believe the price is going up in the long term, then... maybe there's an argument
and
there.
I think that's a valid, way. And you have people like Slush who have created Slush Pool to make it really, there's no reason why you can't join a mining pool. If you have that type of hardware, there's no reason why you can't. So there's a lot of the access is there. So you should, if that's something that's interesting to you, that's definitely something you should look into, because it's a way of attaining Bitcoin without KYC. Same with earning.
Yeah. Another cool saying, and I think we've mentioned this before, and TDev, I think it's basically his catchphrase at this point. He says, make every spend a Coinjoin. So, Samourai Wallet, do you want to just make the case for listeners, why should they make every spend a Coinjoin?
Well, every spend should be a Coinjoin, because with every Coinjoin, whether you can tell it's a Coinjoin or not, like Stowaway, you can't tell, it pollutes the data set and it pollutes the graph of spies and analysts who would apply their own layer of thinking on what should just be a blank slate of transactions, incoming and outgoing. And anything that you can do to mess with them on that, I think, is something that you should do. And it's not only you doing it for you, but by you doing it, you're helping everyone else on the network by creating doubt and disorder within what these people think is a perfectly ordered, world of inputs to outputs, and this is how things must be. By making every spend a Coinjoin, you break that, and there's literally nothing they can do.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I mean, obviously, I'm more about hodling, but my view is more like, if you are spending, you should do it with a Coinjoin, right? Or a Stonewall, which looks like a Coinjoin. Look, I think that's about it. So let's just finish up with, where can listeners find you and where can they learn more about Samourai Wallet?
Sure. Well, we're on samouraiwallet.com, and that's SAMOURAI wallet.com, and the same on Twitter, Samourai Wallet, and on Telegram. So we have a very active Telegram group. It's, I think, one of the most active crypto groups. And we have various rooms for various aspects of our software. So if you're really into Coinjoin, we have a Whirlpool room. If you're just really into the Dojo stuff, we have a Dojo room for you. And if you just want, more of a quiet experience with just the most important updates, we have the main Telegram room as well. And I'm hesitant to mention the secret room.
The secret room is only invite only.
I'll get in trouble. Which I'm not an admin of that one. I don't have anything to do with it, but it's where I hang out the most, I think.
That's right. There's some very good discussions, but let's just say that's an invite only room for that one. So look, thank you again for joining me today. I'm a big fan of the wallet. It is my favorite Bitcoin wallet.
Oh, thank you so much.
So thank you for joining me.
Really appreciate that.
So if you haven't already, go and install Samourai Wallet and go and try out the Ronin Dojo, which is a really easy way to get your own Dojo setup going. You just need a Raspberry Pi 4, a 1TB SSD, and a 16GB micro SD card, and then you can basically follow the instructions. There's a Telegram chat room, and there's a GitHub page with a wiki and a walkthrough. So go and check that out. Also, show notes and transcript are on my website, stefanlivera.com. This is episode 150 if you're trying to find it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the Citadels.